They say cemeteries are places of rest, but for those who walk among the graves each day, some souls never truly sleep. In this chilling true story, a longtime cemetery cleaner shares the haunting tale of a forgotten bell, a grave that should have stayed silent, and a girl who was buried too soon. This is the bell that rang at midnight. My name is Thomas Dillard. I've been cleaning Hollow Pine Cemetery in northern Vermont for the past 21 years. It's not the kind of job you brag about at family dinners, but to me, it's always been more than work. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet most people run from. But not me. I find peace among the dead. The wind through the pine trees, the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the way dusk settles over the stones like a soft gray blanket. There's something sacred about this silence. My shift starts around 2 in the afternoon and often stretches well past sunset. Most of the other staff leave by 5, but I prefer the solitude. With no visitors around, I can focus, scrub down the lichen on headstones, wash the bird droppings off the marble angels, sweep the winding gravel paths that snake between rows of names long forgotten. Every crack in the stone, every carved date becomes familiar, like the worn pages of a book I've read 100 times. People think working in a cemetery must be depressing, but I see it differently. I don't just clean the markers. I remember the names. I polish stories that no one reads anymore. And in doing so, I feel useful, like someone has to care, even when the world forgets. There's one corner of Hollow Pines that doesn't get many visitors. Section E, near the oldest pines, where the stones lean and crumble with age. That's where I first noticed it. A peculiar grave, barely 3 feet wide, framed by rusted iron fencing. Atop the small granite headstone stood a narrow pole, and hanging from that pole was a small silver bell, delicate, untarnished. Its chain disappeared straight down into the earth. At first I thought it was some sort of decoration, maybe a family tradition. But when I looked closer, a cold shiver ran down my arms. The inscription read, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, 1874-1893. Beloved daughter, gentle soul. I had seen photographs of contraptions like this in old medical books. Safety coffins, they were called. Back in the 19th century, people feared being buried alive so much they designed ways for the dead to signal if they woke underground. A bell connected by a cord tied to the wrist of the buried. If the bell rang, it meant someone had made a terrible mistake. Of course, modern medicine had made such devices obsolete. But seeing one still intact in our cemetery, that was something else entirely. I cleaned around Eleanor's grave carefully. The stone was surprisingly well preserved for its age. The bell still gleamed in the light like it was polished weekly. But no one had come to visit. Not once in all the years I'd worked there. I'd begun to make it a habit. Each Thursday evening, before locking up, I'd walk past Eleanor's grave and give a respectful nod. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe the way the bell sat there in stillness made me feel like someone was waiting. Then, one Thursday, just as the sun sank below the tree line and the shadows stretched long over the mossy ground, I heard it. Ding. A single, soft chime, so faint it almost blended with the wind. Ding, ding, ding. 3 times. I froze, my broom halfway in motion. There was no wind strong enough to move it, no birds, no pranksters, only me, only the bell. I stared at it for what felt like minutes, the cold seeping into my bones despite my jacket. Then, slowly, I backed away. I didn't sweep the rest of that path, didn't turn around until I was at the maintenance shed. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I arrived at Hollow Pines earlier than usual. The fog was thick, curling like smoke around the bases of the headstones. I walked straight to Section E. The bell hung silent, unmoved, but its silver surface was smudged, like it had been touched or pulled. I needed answers. We kept old burial records in the caretaker's office, filed away in dusty drawers that no one ever bothered to open. Most of the newer staff didn't even know they were there. But I did. I'd spent many a winter morning sifting through the yellowed pages, tracing the history of this place. It didn't take long to find Eleanor Whitmore. Interred October 1893. Cause of death: typhoid fever, certified by Dr. Amos Bell. That was all. No next of kin, no family address, just a name, a date, a cause, neatly penned in cursive ink, but something about it felt off. Typhoid wasn't uncommon back then, but people rarely installed safety coffins unless there was suspicion, fear, rumors. I dug deeper. An archived article from the Vermont Courier dated November 1893 caught my eye. Grisly exhumation shocks Hollow Pines. Local woman Eleanor Whitmore, presumed dead of fever, was discovered to have been buried alive after townsfolk heard her bell ringing late at night. When the grave was reopened, claw marks were found inside the coffin. Authorities blame misdiagnosis. My stomach turned. She had rung the bell. People had heard it, but by the time they dug her up, I stopped reading. I didn't need to know the rest. I could see it in my mind. A young girl, trapped beneath the earth, screaming into the silence while no one came, nails bleeding, voice hoarse, until nothing. And now, over a century later, I had heard that same bell. For a week, I avoided Section E. I cleaned the new graves, scrubbed marble angels until my hands blistered, raked leaves over and over like it meant something. But every dusk, as the light slipped from the sky, I found my eyes drawn toward the pine trees, toward Eleanor's grave, toward the bell. And then it rang again. It was a Tuesday. Rain was falling, cold, needling rain that soaked through my coat. I was pushing my cleaning cart up the east path when it happened. Ding. My head snapped toward the sound. Ding. Ding. This time, slower, like someone was pulling weakly or deliberately. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my cart and ran toward the sound, splashing through mud and gravel. The air around Section E felt different. Warmer, almost humid, despite the rain. The bell was swaying gently, metal ticking against the pole. And in that moment, I swear to God, I heard it. A sound, soft, fragile, like a whimper beneath the soil. "Eleanor," I said aloud, instantly regretting it. No answer, only the rain, only the bell. I knelt beside the grave, pressing my hand to the cold stone. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something sweet and old, like pressed flowers left too long in a book. A tremble ran through my arm, not from fear, from grief. She had suffered, and somehow, impossibly, she still lingered. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because something had shifted. Something unspoken had passed between that grave and me. A request, a trust. I didn't know how to explain it, but I knew. She didn't ring that bell for help. Not anymore. She rang it for me. The next day I brought a single white rose and placed it at Eleanor's grave. I stood there for a long time, soaked to the bone in morning mist, staring at the bell that now hung perfectly still. And then I spoke. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry no one came when you needed them. I'm sorry your story was buried with you. But I hear you now, and I'll remember." Something in the air shifted. The pine needles rustled in a way that had nothing to do with wind. And for the first time since I started working at Hollow Pines, I cried. The following week I went to the historical archives in town. I told the local librarian everything. Well, everything that didn't make me sound insane. She was kind, listened quietly. Then she led me to a locked cabinet of forgotten burial accounts. Among them, I found a sealed envelope addressed to "Whomever Still Cares." It was written by Eleanor's mother. Inside was a letter, brittle with age. "If anyone finds this, please forgive us. We trusted the doctor. We buried her with prayers, not knowing she still lived. We installed the bell just in case. I begged the groundskeeper to check it daily. He never did. If she rings again, listen. Please, listen." The ink had faded in places, but the pain was fresh, bleeding through the page like it was written yesterday. 2 nights later, I stayed at the cemetery late. I brought a chair, a lantern, a thermos of coffee, and I sat beneath the pine trees, facing Eleanor's grave. Midnight came. Nothing. Then the wind picked up. The clouds parted just enough for moonlight to drip across the mossy stones. Ding. One soft chime, followed by silence. I stood up, heart pounding. The bell rocked slightly. No wind, no rain, just that single, deliberate sound. I stepped forward and whispered, "I'm here." Then, for the first and only time, I heard her voice, faint, like a breath inside my ear. "Thank you." It wasn't a sound I heard with ears exactly. It was something I felt. Inside the chest, deep in the marrow, like the last page of a long-forgotten story finally turned. The bell stilled. The air grew colder, and from that day on, it never rang again. I still work at Hollow Pines, still scrub the stones, still sweep the paths and polish the names, but when I pass Eleanor's grave, I always leave a rose. I always pause, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch the faint scent of lilacs in the air, even in the dead of winter. Maybe it was all in my head, maybe not. All I know is this: the dead don't always want to be saved. Sometimes they just want to be heard.